Hi class, time for lecture 4. Now we're going to talk specifically about the structure of an argument, how we evaluate specifically whether the argument offers enough logical support for the conclusion. This is going to coincide with this handout on an argument's structure that I gave out in class. It's also available at the course documents section of the website. Alright, so just a reminder, here is our good way of evaluating arguments, the way that we like. We need to figure out whether the premises are good enough evidence to rationally convince us that the conclusion is correct. That's from last lecture. And this is also from last lecture. Here are the two separate steps we do to evaluate every argument to see whether it's good or bad evidence. First, we check the truth. We ask, is each premise true, false, or questionable? Then we check the structure. Do we have enough information to figure out the conclusion? Oh, that's just a quick review. We're going to be focused on this lecture on the structure section. And first things first, I guess I want to explain why I refer to this as the argument's structure. So the handout says there's an underlying logic to each argument, that is the logical relationship between the premises and the conclusion. And arguments will have the same structure, even though there are some other differences between arguments. Arguments might wind up having the same underlying structure. Here's two arguments. I think on the handout I give you three arguments. First argument, all humans are mammals. All mammals have hair, therefore all humans have hair. That has the same exact underlying structure as argument number 2 here. All dolphins are mammals, all mammals have wings, therefore all dolphins have wings. Those share this same exact underlying structure, the structure that's listed there on the bottom. All A's are B's, all B's have C's, therefore all A's have C's. Notice we're actually talking about different things. In argument 1, we're talking about humans and mammals and hair. In argument 2, we're talking about dolphins and fish and wings. But the logical relationship between those premises and the conclusion is identical. And you should also notice that argument 1 is good. Overall, not only does it have a good structure, but also those premises are true. Argument number 2 is bad overall. It has the same structure, it's a good structure, but those premises are actually false. Dolphins aren't fish, they're mammals, and not all fish have wings. I don't know that any fish have wings, but that's a separate thing. So, back to this relationship between truth and structure. Suppose I should not even use the word relationship because there is not a relationship between truth and structure. These steps are completely independent of each other. This is going to be a theme running throughout this lecture. I'm going to try to hammer this home as often as possible. So there are two separate tests you have to do every time you evaluate arguments. I recommend doing the truth test first, then the support or structure test second. This truth test means checking the premises against reality. You simply ask, is this premise actually true? Or is it false or questionable, like we talked about last lecture? And this is pretty much common sense. We're pretty good at determining whether something matches reality or not. The support test has nothing to do with reality, though. It's a more abstract test of the logical relationships between the premises and the conclusion. So you're not worried about what's happening in reality. You're worried about whether, if the premises were true, they would provide or prove the conclusion is true. So you ask, instead of the question, are these premises true, you ask, if the premises were true, would they prove the conclusion? And that's weirder because that doesn't involve a lot of common sense. You're not asking a simple question there. You're asking a slightly more tricky, convoluted question. Now, here's what I think of as the best method for evaluating the structure of an argument. Remember, this is after you evaluate the truth, which is separate. Then you turn to evaluate the structure. You do what I call the imagine a world test. You imagine this fantastic, different world from ours, where all the premises are true. And I want you to treat this imaginary world like a Disney movie, where anything goes. If you think about Beauty and the Beast, in that imaginary world, apparently teacups can talk, and clocks and candles. They're all available, and they're talking, and some of them have nice French accents, etc. So you imagine this world, you just assume the premises are true in that world. But that's the only thing you know about this imaginary world. Now you ask yourself, in this imaginary world, where the premises are true, must the conclusion also be true? Or is it possible for you to imagine a world where the premises are true, but the conclusion isn't? It's false in your made-up world. Now, depending on your answer to that question, that's going to tell you whether you have a good logical structure or a bad logical structure. If the conclusion has to be true, that means the argument has good structure. The information provided in the premises prove that the conclusion is true. If the conclusion can be false, however, that's when you have a bad structure. The information in the premises didn't prove the conclusion. It didn't give you enough information to logically lead you to that conclusion. So the important thing here about this Imagine a World test is you're ignoring the truth. You're not worried at all about whether the premises are actually true or false. We only care about the truth during the truth test, not the structure test. And structure is not about whether the premises are actually true or false. It's about this notion of what I call truth preservation, whether the argument preserves the truth, preserving that from the premises to the conclusion. So let me talk a little bit more detail about truth preservation. So the idea about truth preservation is if you stick in true premises into a truth-preserving argument, then you'll either definitely or most likely get a true conclusion. I say definitely or most likely because it's depending on the standard of argument you have. If you're trying to absolutely 100% prove the conclusion, then your standard of truth preservation should be definitely. If you're only trying to show that the conclusion's probably or most likely true, then your standard of truth preservation will be lower. Anyway, that's a side issue. The tricky thing about truth preservation is an argument can have good truth preservation even if you stuck in actually false premises. Notice this says if you stick in true premises, then you'll definitely get a true conclusion. It doesn't say you're actually sticking in true premises in the particular argument you're dealing with. An argument will still have a good structure regardless of whether the premises you stick in are actually true or false. That is, an argument will be truth-preserving in this way, regardless of whether the premises are actually true or false. So, the idea is if the premises were true, they'd logically lead you to a true conclusion. I like to think of this the same way you might think of a blender. If you stick in healthy foods into a blender, then you're guaranteed whatever you get out as a result of that blender will be healthy. If, however, you stick in nasty, unhealthy food, there's no guarantee that the blender will magically turn that concoction into healthy foods. But a blender is health-preserving. If you stick in healthy food, you'll get out a healthy drink. If you don't stick in healthy food, there's no guarantee you'll get a healthy drink out of it. And in fact, you probably won't get a healthy drink out of it. It's the same idea going on here, a little bit weirder. Don't know if that analogy helped, but whatever.